things are economically not in movement. The people who have the money are not spending the money here. And then now we've got these new policies that seem to be pushing away a bunch of people who have the money instead of incentivizing them to stay and spend it. So we have people that sit on their wealth like dragons, like hoarding the wealth pile, and they're doing one of two things. They continue hoarding the wealth or they leave with the wealth. And I feel like we need to be instead incentivizing people to stay and spend that wealth so it's actually in circulations. But is this a cultural issue, right? Is this just the British are too risk averse, Europeans are too risk averse, too slow to want to do these things?
Yeah. And a true desire issue. Like, do you really want, like, this is the difficulty of what the narratives come out. We must address this. We must change this. I've been in the social impact field now for 15 years, active on the ground, and you just suddenly step back and feel like, is this really a desire? Like, governments come out and talk about, we've got to address this, and this is critical for the future generations. And you're like, yeah, but all the policies go against that, right? I feel like there's a lack of cognitive diversity in the top echelons, whether it's the holders of the cash, the people making the decisions. Very few people have experienced what it is they are talking about changing.
That's interesting. So cognitive diversity, we're talking about the ability to think differently. Everyone thinks too similarly to each other.
Yeah, and I feel like that can come from the same education, the same schools, the same experiences. If you don't bring experiential differences to the table, how are you ever going to be able to critically challenge one another, be agile? And this is what I feel like time and time again, our government, the civil service, it's just got this sort of sameness about it, regardless of who's in power. Regardless.
That's interesting. I remember speaking to some civil servants after the last election, and they were like, we just have more energy. Like, they show up to work and everyone has more energy because something new was finally going to happen. And it feels like that just didn't happen. It just feels like there's more... I think we have a different flavor of lack of energy and unhelpful decisions, right? We had that for as long as I've been in this country, which is 13 years. And we just have more of that now. And it's just a different flavor of it. Before, it was like a level of, I don't know, especially as that last government got further and further into its time and into COVID, it felt like there was more corruption, there was more polarization, there was more hypocrisy. And now our flavor is meekness. It's, I'm going to bend over backwards to look like I'm doing the right thing, but I don't have a vision for what we do want.
Yeah.
That's the part that really gets to me, because you cannot lead without a vision. Otherwise, people create their own versions of the vision, and everyone has a different vision. And so there's just messiness where we need unity.
Well, and both of those outcomes lead to apathy, right? The scenario where we started to see more hypocrisy, more corruption, that leads to apathy. And then this one, where you might not necessarily feel like there's a vision to grab onto, also leads to apathy. And apathy inevitably leads to a lack of accountability, because if we all suddenly go, oh, get on with it, we're not playing our role. And I saw that for a decade in my work, like actively trying to engage young people to be part of the process when there's just so many clear and obvious hurdles preventing them, whether they're educated originally, whether they're encouraged to register to vote, whether they fully understand the process and how they can play a role. It's crazy. And that's what I was saying. The difficulty is we also live in a society now where it's like absolute truths. If you say something, it means you are pinning your flag to everything else that exists attached to that person. So if I look at now the new president of the US and the way he is talking positively about America and talking about doing things for America, and then you look at some of the opening speeches our current prime minister made, like, it will be tough and it's going to be hard on you.
That's such a good point.
And you're like, wow. And I want to be able to go, I really like that. about America without someone going, oh, but do you like everything this guy stands for? It's like, no, it's a different debate.
Yes.
You know? And the thing is, when I first launched Verto, it was a voter advice app. And we got young people to predominantly swipe if they agreed with a policy and swipe if they disagreed with a policy. And the algo would start to show you, these are the issues you care about the most. This is the party you match the most. And the more you played the experience, the more it sort of presented to you, what are you going to do? You're going to vote for the issue you care about the most. You're going to vote for the party you care about most. But not turning up isn't an option, even if you go and spoil your ballot paper. It was all centered around, you've got to be involved. When we got that data and the new Prime Minister came in, David Cameron, we were just ignored. And I had 500,000 data points, unique players. And I could show you there is no left and right wing. It's nonsense. Crime, more right. Defence, more right. Environment, more left. Education, more left. Health, bit of both. Whatever it may be, the data didn't lie. And this is where I feel like we've neglected that. We neglect the reality. We don't look at the data and see what exists. We stick to this stone wall. Oh, no. If you're poor, if you're black, if you're this, you vote left because...
Yes.
Yeah, and if you're this, you vote... And when the anomalies come out, everyone's will be like, oh, it's like...
Hey everyone, I wanted to take one quick sec to talk about a new partner that I am so excited to announce I have on the show, an agency called Untapped. Untapped exists to put your brand in the world's pocket with beautifully crafted, high-impact mobile experiences. They've worked with brands like Barclays, EA Sports, American Express, and even the UK government. They're known for creating powerful apps with intuitive, seamless interactions that drive customer engagement and elevate brand recognition. But it isn't just tech development. Their expertise is bridging phenomenal quality technology with beautiful design to create the highest quality product possible that takes your users on a real journey with you. You may remember Will, the founder of Untapped, from episode 13 of the podcast. If you haven't heard that chat, I highly recommend it because it shows you what kind of no-nonsense, sleeves-rolled-up kind of people he and the team he's built really are, and it reflects in the kind of work that they do. They want to make their clients' work recognized across their industries and drive real game-changing value, something I've personally experienced and appreciated working with them myself. For businesses who want to take this next step in their journey, Untapped can help with everything from tech creation to brand design to product marketing and so much more. All right, the links are down below. Check it out. And now back to the episode. This extreme segmentation, which I think
crazy.
I know a lot of people and also don't know a lot of people, because it's a very loud global voice, of those who are really upset by Trump's re-inauguration, right? Him getting back in. And I sit on this interesting fence as a dual American and Brit who hasn't lived in America for quite a while, going, he has spoken to everybody, regardless of the box and segmentation, in a world where everyone's been boxed. Everyone's been labeled, everyone's been isolated, and that is only going to lead people to worse outcomes, greater loneliness, greater mental health issues, feeling like every single political decision is not in their interest, feeling not identified with whoever you voted for, regardless of who it was or the party, and so of course you're going to get a bunch of people, they're going to get the pendulum swinging back in the other direction, where people are like, I don't care who you are, or what your past record is, or the crazy things that you said. You're the only one who's saying you're here for me. And so do those who wanted different outcomes only have themselves to blame?
I certainly feel like this labeling and categorization, this has been happening for decades, right? And ultimately it aids in control, because the more we're at each other's throats on the ground level, the more we can't really contemplate what's going on the top floor.
Yeah, the British coined this, really perfected the divide and conquer, and it's just updated to be political divide and conquer.
Absolutely. Even to their own people, it's like, wow,
Yeah.
okay. And it doesn't have to be like that, right? Because you mentioned things like loneliness, and that's the root of this. Like, we've forgotten what it means to be community. We quickly see the differences in one another and fail to see the similarities. And this is dangerous territory. Especially if you look at younger people, you're like, wow, what are we creating for them? What are they taking the baton to create for themselves? Like this unnecessary, oh, you're this, you can't talk to them, and that's different, stay away. It's like we don't address the biggest issues facing humanity because we're at each other's throats.
When you were building Bite the Ballot, and even now, you're still working with young people, just a slightly different way. Like, what were the biggest warning signals you noticed, right? You mentioned apathy. What were you or are you still noticing that we need to really like sound the alarm bells because of?
Well, the thing is, when I was in the mix of Bite the Ballot, I would challenge a lot of the political status quo and the media status quo to say apathy doesn't exist, because unless I'm fully educated and understand my role in an ecosystem, how can I be apathetic? You're judging me. You know, they'd say, oh, young people are apathetic, they don't vote. And I'd go, yeah, but who's told them about it? I didn't register to vote until I was 28.
That's a really good point.
I was
Really?
28 years old. I went the whole way through my secondary school education, A levels, university, without ever really being, do you know about politics? And, oh, you care about that issue, it's local, and this decides this, and you can vote for that, and you've got power, right? When the vote first came and people were fighting for it, they knew that the vote could compete against the pound coin, right? Our vote had power. But the more and more it went on, and the more the value of the vote went down and people turned against it, it's the more we sort of segregated where the money is and where the control is. And now most people would probably look and think, what's the point? You know, what's the point in voting? They're all the same. It's all I ever used to hear. So I feel like apathy is an interesting one, because I don't think it's a fair label. If you provide me the experiential learning to understand the value of the vote, what I can do with it, and my pathway to participate and hold people to account and challenge. And then I go, no, then fine, you can call me apathetic. But we just still don't do that. You know, I closed Bite the Ballot in 2019, and we're still talking about low voter registration levels, low turnout levels. It's sad, because I felt like a lot of the things I was doing, if the establishment really wanted it, could be done. Could be done.
What are the things you wanted them to do that you still want them to do? Because obviously if nothing's changed, right, then we still need to do the same things.
Well, look, for me, it's just, how can we exist in a society where people don't even know you have to register to vote? You know, your average young person wouldn't even know you have to register to vote, let alone what it does, how you do it, how you participate, what's a local issue, what's a national issue. Like this fabric of education that certain schools will give you doesn't exist everywhere. And if it does, it's boring. You know, if you actively have to take political studies A level, because you've already got a nous of, this is going to get me into one of the top colleges and then one of the top universities, and then I'm going to X, and you know, you've already got that path. That doesn't exist in its entirety. So therefore, because we don't understand power and we're easily divided, we find it very difficult as a society to hold people to account. To go, wow, that was corrupt, right? We're going to challenge that. You're gone next time, or we're not standing for this. So it's a shame, but it's complex as well, because it's not as easy as, oh, they just don't want everyone to know about it, because I don't believe that is 100% the reason.
There's usually multiple factors.
There's multiple
that
factors.
Are working together. So it might be partially true, but is it the whole truth? Can there be multiple truths at one time?
Yeah. But I feel like having been involved in projects that do involve those most affected, those that make the decisions, those that are accountable for the decisions, when you weave together that the sum of its parts to a common outcome, some of the impact is phenomenal. And you start to recognize, this, they're scared of this generation and they're scared of this. It's mainly fear.
You think fear of what?
Fear of not understanding, fear,
Okay.
when I was in the mix of Bite the Ballot, and it's predominantly existed under a coalition and Tory rule, it was always the notion that, well, young people won't vote for us, so let's not engage with them, regardless of whether the evidence to the contrary. So it's a fear. I think there's too much fear that flows around us to just lean into that a little bit, recognize, there's fear in you and there's fear in me, but where's the Venn diagram where we overlap? Where's the commonality that we can move ahead from? And politics is one part of that, but
we're far more similar than we are different. We all are. We all always will be, right? I remember when I was in school, I had a brilliant teacher who did this like so well. It's an all boys school, and so he goes, "What's the opposite of a man?" And everyone goes, "A woman," just unconsciously, right? We're all teenage boys, and he goes, "There is nothing more like a human man than a human woman. So how can you be opposites?" And it's just like, right? We live in a world where we have conceptual frameworks to navigate that world. We forget that they're just tools, or maybe even never realized to begin with, that they're just tools for little uses where useful. And everything else is put the tool down, right? It's like that saying of someone who goes around with a hammer thinks everything is a nail. This is a tool, and we need to leave it behind. As a result, we go around thinking we're totally separate from everyone else.
Yeah.
But actually, we're all far more similar than we all ever are different. And I guess I'm wondering, like, where does this challenge therefore come from, right? If what we have is, if we are lost in the illusion of separation, and that is like a fundamental complex challenge here, how has it gotten so bad? And I'm thinking it's a mix of education systems, a mix of politics and politicking, and the media are the main things that come to my mind. But what are your thoughts?
I feel like we're isolated as a species. There's a lot of loneliness amongst us. For men, especially, there's a lack of vulnerability. There's an association that vulnerability is weakness. And ultimately, most humans, the older we get, we don't recognize our wounds, which most of the time stem from childhood trauma, some sort of that. There's a wounded inner child in all of us. And I think that ability to face it head on and be conscious and start to look at, why am I triggered by that? Why is that a repeated pattern in my life? The necessity to do the inner work, to really look within and figure out, gosh, why does that keep happening to me? Why does that thing really trigger me? Why am I always angry at that class? Or, it's like you've got to start to peel back and look within. And if we created an environment where everyone could do that, and then sort of take the wisdom from our pain, ultimately, we have the chance to start to see things differently. But I feel like the difficulty is when we're all being squeezed, the pressure in our society, the pressure to earn, the pressure to survive, this switch is clicked in one way or another that we find ourselves in survival mode, fight or flight. And it's very difficult to then feel empathy for another human when you're in that. me, and these are the bits that fundamentally need to be addressed, because as you've said, which I agree with, we've got far more in common even aspirationally. You know, we've got so much more in common, and I do believe we've got all of the tools and resources to create that reality. We just need this awakening, you know. And I am encouraged by a younger generation. They're a lot more vulnerable and a lot more open. And I'm interested to see what will happen as that grows and suddenly, because I think about my dad. He grew up in a household where his father fought in the Second World War and come back, and his main role was to provide for his 7 kids and his wife. So there wasn't much time to teach his boys, especially, what it meant to be vulnerable. You know, we still have don't cry like a girl, and this sort of toxic masculinity. And I'm talking about men particularly because I am one, and because really globally they're the majority of the people in power. So that work needs to start there.
A lot of our leaders, regardless of their background or how they identify or whatever, are walking around with child wounds that they haven't worked out. And the rest of us have to deal with the effect of that.
Yeah, whilst trying to figure out that in many ways they might be holding up a mirror to our wounds. That's certainly true in relationships, which I genuinely believe is like you will be attracted to the people that hold up a mirror to the work you've got to do on yourself.
That's interesting. There's a Sanskrit saying that everyone else is just a reflection of you. So everyone else you don't like, the reason you don't like them is because a part of you is part of what you're saying with them is within
about
you.
Yourself. Exactly.
Yeah.
Look at that the voices we have to juggle within. When that ego clicks and you have that rerunning constant conversation in your own head, and like you have to catch it.
Yeah.
I went to an amazing retreat last year at Plum Village, which is a Buddhist monastery.
I've heard of it. I'm following it, actually.
Amazing. And I went there, and it was for people working in climate to some degree. There was 200 people, and each day we sort of had different practices around meditation and, you know, noble silence around meals and things like that. But one of the pieces that I really enjoyed was when the sort of Buddhist monks and nuns shared a reflection on it's okay how we can exist in a world where part of the world's on fire and part of the world's this, and one of the pieces come up about how we can be so absorbed by a negative emotion. And there was this really cool technique that they said, which I've tried to practice a lot, which is when you feel that sudden surge of anger or frustration or road rage or whatever it is, call it out by welcoming it. Because the minute you cut yourself into two, essentially, and go, oh, hello, anger, you are welcome here. By default, you're no longer consumed with it. You've called it out, you know? Whereas if you're in it and you're... And I know that in myself, the conversations I wish I had, or if I had been challenged or upset and I didn't stand up in the moment, in calmness, but just owned my truth, I'll have that same conversation days, nights, weeks on end until I finally put it to bed as a lesson learned. So there is a lot around this woundedness, but I feel like the healing is in each other and the way we accept one another, the way we create space for one another, the way we allow ourselves to not have to be perfect. Politics especially, or the media especially. How fearful it must be if you're in these worlds and something goes wrong, and the extent that they go to, sometimes costing billions of pounds to cover it up, because apologising and admitting defeat, well, this is not an option. How many people fight tooth and nail to get the media to correct something that's wrong, and they'll just fight. This sort of sense of we can't hold our hands up, you know, there's weakness in admitting we're wrong. There's so much strength in that.
This is so beautiful because I have realized that we are having a global consciousness conversation. And I'm really interested in being part of it as I grow my personal brand. I'm, 30, this is episode 35, I think this will be, this one that we're recording now, which has happened in a short space of time. As this goes into multiple dozens, hundreds, I want to be part of that conversation, because that is the antidote to what we're describing. When you talk about survival mode, Joe Dispenza outlines this beautifully, the difference between survival mode and creation mode. And it's basically, survival mode is any survival emotion, lust, sadness, anger, frustration. Ego, therefore, is a parallel that is accessed through the survival mode state. We all have ego within us. Is it controlling us? Is it taking over? If so, you're probably living in survival. The goal is to get beyond that into creation mode. And what you're describing is being in creation mode. Am I able to speak my truth? Am I able to access my creativity? Am I able to be empathetic? And we can't do that while we're living in survival. Now, there's something specific within this, which is, he also outlines really beautifully, living in survival, by definition, makes you a materialist. So if all that exists is these physical things, these cups and my physical body, and that's it, and it's all just physical matter, my physical body can believe that because it needs to deal with physical situations, like a bear is attacking me or whatever, right? So it makes sense when you're in survival mode for material worlds to be the only thing you're thinking about. My concern is when we're all as polarized as you describe, and we're all caught up in these survival emotions, and if that's all we're ever like, right? We're always stressed out because at work things are stressful, and then I go home and I'm like, can I pay the bills because the economy is crap? And then my wife yells at me and whatever. It's just everything is stress and survival in this theoretical, stereotypical narrative. I never have the space to go beyond that and live in anything beyond materialism.
Oof.
Now, my concern, and this is where I want your perspective, is when we are living in that state of materialism, all of our goals, all of our desires in life shift to material ones.
Yeah.
Right? So an example that I just find so fascinating is when you ask people how much money that they need to be happy and comfortable, to be satisfied, I'm good, it's usually 3 times more whatever they have right now. So if you make 50K, I'll be really happy when I'm making 150K.
Yeah.
If it's 150, 450. If it's $1 million, 3 million. And this goes all the way up. Wow. You could ask a billionaire, just made $1 billion, they'll be like, I'll be really happy when I've made 3 billion.
Yeah.
Even though we know beyond a certain number of millions, you just don't notice anymore.
Yeah, man.
Because it can't make any difference to your life.
Desire to want more.
Yeah. What's your perspective of where this plays in, right? I'm thinking about the data you see from young people, and especially as you say, this generation is changing things a little bit and seeing things maybe a little bit differently. But I also see a lot of young people where they just want the external success, right? It's easier than ever to start a business online, makes me money. An 18-year-old who's making 10 figures a month, and they're just obsessed with more and more and more money.
Yeah.
And that will, regardless of how epic that is in one way, it also pulls us away from living beyond materialism.
Yeah, but I think it goes back to your point around, what do we expect? We've created that culture, right? You must have this. Your life will be better if you drive this car, if you smell this way, if you wear this brand. Look at just shoved down our throats. I mean, I didn't get a mobile phone until I was 16, right? And even then, all I could really do was text and play Snake. So
the best game.
We're talking about with a whole generation who have this endless access, but ultimately to knowledge and to information, but it comes at a cost. To have this endless access, you have endless advertising. And if you're growing up in a way that, reality TV shows these people and the perceived notion of success is the size of the car and the pool and this, we're at that point now where we've really got to stop and consider what does success mean? And can I have success if other people have nothing? Because I feel like we forget the interconnectedness of all of us. If pain exists somewhere, then it affects us all in one way or another, but we can be so dismissive of it. So I feel like as a younger generation, there's so much potential, but there needs to be some lessons learned from those that have walked a little bit further in the journey to create a space for them to be making these decisions. Like, okay, if I'm earning that money, but have I got purpose? Am I leaving the world a little bit better than what I found it? What does it mean to address some of society's issues? And even in the recent sort of piece of research we did over in the UAE, it was really interesting that you start to see hope declining with age. And it's a small window. Like, we're talking about 12 being the youngest and 22 being the oldest. But hope goes down the older you get.
Really?
When it comes to environment and climate and the planet.
Even at that age?
Even at that age.
So a 12-year-old is more hopeful for the future.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But then I feel like, again, if you address that against the education system that hasn't really changed much in hundreds of years now, even if I look at my own experience, you leave primary school and you like science and you sort of love it. You get to secondary school and it all suddenly goes a little bit more textbook, lack of experiential learning, lack of play. And, you start to be dismissive. Oh, that's boring. I don't like that. So I feel like this is why I'm so passionate about play. You have to address things in a way where it can be engaging and fun to look at serious issues. Because most people, I feel like, as much as it's a strong tactic, and we certainly see it in the media and we certainly see it in some corners of the political world, they lead with fear. Right? So the more scared you are, the more likely you are to just fall in line. The pandemic proved that. Like, how many civil liberties we've allowed ourselves to just give up because of, no, we need to monitor everything. We need to view this and we need to watch you here for your safety. So I feel like there's this underlying issue around just creating space for us to explore the things that affect us, upset us, doing it in creative ways and demonstrating that you don't always have to be in survival mode, and some of the ways out of it is through community. I found a lot of the senses that sometimes I can feel so lonely, but actually the things I'm worried about as a leader, other people feel exactly the same way. And in that, you find commonality, and that there's this sense of, it's not just me.
What do you think success means to most people beyond the material, right? I was going to ask, what does success mean to you? And we all have a bit of a different answer to that, but actually you've got data points that might illuminate what people value most.
I think it's a good question. And I exist in multiple worlds, I guess, because the social impact sector is fairly small. It's not that well known, really. You don't have hundreds and hundreds of kids leaving school going, I'm going to be a social entrepreneur. But people care about things. And I feel like existing in the social enterprise sector where people have actively seen an issue and said, I can address that, and then lent in and created programs, initiatives, communities to do that at a grassroots level, scaled, I see that actually success to them is attributed to purpose and impact. And that can have a diverse effect, because what you develop by default is a resilience and an ability to endure, and inevitably you push, and people burn out. So even in the social impact ecosystem, I don't know the exact figure, but it's common that it's one of the highest sectors to work in where people divorce.
Really?
Because you can just be so driven. I saw it even with Bite the Ballot, I think towards the end of the 10 years. I did that for 10 years. It was an idea in a classroom, a lunchtime club for a year, and then right up to world record breaking registration drives, changing policy. But towards the end of it, I felt like, who am I outside of Bite the Ballot? So you can become so entrenched in it that it can take over. But I do see success attributed to impact. So it's beyond the individual. It's around impacting others, making society a better place, changing stuff positively. But then I also exist in worlds where friends have attribute success to value, monetary value, the job, the promotion, how many holidays we can have. But fundamentally, across both, there's this little bit in the middle where most people would, of a certain age, will feel like they've been successful if their kids are happy. So it's these polarizations that can all exist
and
at
they
the same
can exist
time.
at once. Exactly. If the real challenge here is us being driven by a desire for material, a desire for what Deepak Chopra would describe as symbols of success, not the success itself, but the symbol of the success, right? So instead of being rich, I want the car to symbolize I'm rich or whatever.
Yeah.
We're chasing material and we're chasing, even worse, sometimes symbols of that material success. What factors are exacerbating that material, that desire for the material success? If the challenge is we're living in the material and what we really need to be doing is living in creation mode and showing up with more love and more togetherness, more community, more empathy, then we need to solve why this materialism challenge is so bad, right? What factors do you think are making this so challenging right now?
Well, it's a system in itself, right? And you've got, ultimately, it's driven by profit. So it's going to be very difficult to break that apart because everyone in that ecosystem who's driven by selling, promotion, etc., there's a monetary worth to that, right? And that worth brings you stability and growth and status. And that's going to be very difficult to pick apart, right? We're not trying to say you need to defeat capitalism and change everything. But at the same time, you can create spaces where that doesn't exist all the time. So even in education, you can create a space that looks beyond the material and looks to the collective, or create a space for empathy to communicate and share, or active learning, or whatever it may be. And then the hope is that people start to figure that stuff out. Like I've got 2 kids. I was shocked when my daughter turned around and said, right, I'm deleting Snapchat. It makes me anxious. I recognize I quickly go to the map and see where people are. I get FOMO. People can contact me all the time. I have to contact them back within a certain time. So she's like, done, finished.
I love that for her. That's so good.
Right? But at the same time, I feel like it's not about trying to break or all go, right, we need to break this sort of desire for material goods. I feel like we need to trust that if we create space for other things to be explored, that sense of flourishing that can occur there will make us naturally see, I actually felt better when I was in community, or when I was doing something positive for someone else, or when I was addressing an issue that mattered, or I stood up for someone, or I did a random act of kindness. That made me feel far better than buying X. So if we create the spaces, and I equally believe that, again, as we've said, seems to be the theme here, both of those can exist at the same time. You can do good and have things. And that's part of I think the reality I'm trying to prove to myself. You can do good in the world and want some material stuff. It's not all bad. Just becomes a bit bad when this sense of everything's replaceable. I'll get another one, I'll get this, So this sort of...
That's the essence of social entrepreneurialism, right? That you are, and that you've been describing as like, when I create success for others, I create success for myself. I grew up with a very socialist father who was like, business is the enemy, that type of vibe. And then when I was 18, I got a hold of a book that talked about social entrepreneurship at a time when I was weighing up, do I try to go into politics to make the world a better place? Do I try to work for an NGO to make the world a better place? Because I knew I wanted to do that, and realized that I could make my life better and the world better at the same time. You just have to have the right intentionality, and it's work, right?
It
But
is
anything that's worth it is work.
Absolutely. And I feel like one of the biggest mechanisms for me to become a better version of myself is gratitude. Like what rather than looking at what I haven't got, what have I got? Yeah, and this is a lens to see things, right? I can look at the current state of Play Verto. We need more people, and if they paid us a bit more, or if they paid on time. But then I can also look and go, wow, we've just done X. We've done this project's come to us. So there's the sense of I want to be able to grow through gratitude, not through this sort of lack. I need to do that because it will get me this, this sort of sense of I'm driven only by status or symbols, as you said. I think most people genuinely care about others. We just need to create the conditions where it can be expressed more.
Yeah.
And it's coming in its own way. I'm lucky enough to work in a ecosystem where I see a lot of amazing things happening around the world, a lot of initiatives that are solving some of society's most pressing issues. Have they made their way to the echelons of the political debate yet? No. Some people then actively fight to influence the system based on those examples, and it goes on. But I can certainly feel confident that I avoid most of the traditional news and doom and gloom, and I can stay connected to what people are dedicating their lives to, what teams are dedicating their lives to, how they're working with communities to solve pressing issues. And there's a sense of there's just as much good going on as there is bad.
Yeah. Hey, I just wanted to jump in here really quickly with an offer for you. Those of you who are a little newer to my work, which is most of you looking at the show's stats, will probably not know that for much of my career, I've been working with people to take more ownership of their lives as a coach, mentor, guide, and educator. This show exists to help people discover and cultivate their greatest inner leader. And that stems from a personal mission of mine. But what does it actually mean? Well, I break this down into 3 things: calm, confidence, and courage. We could all do with a little bit more, at least a little bit more, of all 3 of those things in our lives. But how do we make it happen? Well, that depends on us, on our temperament and our context, and so much more. So I've developed a free tool to help us understand 3 of the biggest things that I've noticed hold us back from those really powerful states to be in: restlessness, reactivity, and resistance. What I help folks do is move from that place into that place of calm, courage, and confidence instead. So you can use the link below to check that out. It's totally free, super simple, quick, and easy to use so that you can get just a little bit of clarity in that regard. And I created it just for this show because I noticed how important it was to overcome exactly those challenges. That's what the show is trying to help you do after all, so why not make it easy for you? So with all that being said, I really appreciate you. Hope you find that useful, and let's get back into this episode. This is why I wonder what exacerbates this challenge, because there's so much beauty and goodness and giving and love and kindness all around the world. And what we're seeing is an education system that doesn't prepare us, that puts us in an unhelpful state of mind, I think, exacerbated by the media, which does this because, like you just said, you avoid the news. I do too. Like, the news isn't news anymore, it's clickbait, because it has to compete with social media and other clickbait for our attention as a resource. And then you've got politics, which responds to all of this and does what serves it as a system. And this just feels like a big mess. It sounds like the antidote is to go within and to find solutions within either yourself or your nuclear community. So, your family, for example.
Yeah.
What would you've got 2 young kids, what would you say to them or encourage them to do or think about or be involved in to do some of that and or so that they don't go down that rabbit hole that maybe society tries to suck us into?
Well, I think I was lucky enough to appreciate the power of vulnerability when I was 36. I went on a wellness program organized for social entrepreneurs, and it was the first time ever where the space was created to sort of unveil the stuff I rap about myself in shame and guilt. And it was like so liberating. And I think we can find it easier to tell strangers the deepest, darkest depths of what goes on in our heads than we can the people we grew up with. But one of the things I learned from that was I need to create the environment at home where my kids can talk and be vulnerable and share without judgment. As difficult as that can often be. So, started to do silly little games at the dinner table, like, one thing you're grateful for, one thing you need help with. And the first time we would start to do this, whichever one of the kids spoke first, the other one would go, "Oh yeah, me too." Whereas, but then they started to develop a little bit of a voice and bring some realness and some truth. So trying to create a space with the kids and young people more broadly in my work where they can own their truth and learn that I can't own your reaction to my truth, but I can own my truth. And there's an interesting moat there that teaches us, can I own my truth and let it go and not then overreact if someone doesn't agree with me or challenges me? Can I own my truth with kindness and compassion? Can I share it in a way where I'm not being divisive? This is the thing I'm trying to facilitate with my children. But then that exists in a state of also them being like, oh my God, they're on their screens too long. How do I do? So it's like, it's interesting, but ultimately for me, the biggest thing I want them to be able to do is really connect deeply to how they feel, maybe understand why they feel that way, what are their triggers early on, how can they address them, so they just become a little bit more rounded, younger, and then they'll be equipped to recognize the similarities they see in themselves in others and find a bond there, or be quick to see my reality is different to them. Why? And so, asking questions, finding a dialogue that they can also navigate internally. My son especially is so hard on himself. And I've just started to grapple with the concept of the ego and the little voices. Which voice do you give energy to?
How old is he?
14.
Wow, okay.
Is it the one that criticizes you? Is it the one that tells you after a football match, you did this wrong, you did this wrong? Or is it the voice that says, that bit went really well? What can I do next? How can I learn from it? And, he's introduced now a little bit to meditation and journaling. And these are early things that they might not be his tools moving forward, but I think I'm trying to bring to the kids these are the tools that work for me that I learned at 36.
Mm-hmm. If only you learned them 20 years earlier.
So play with them now and see. So it's ultimately about consciousness.
Yeah, I love this. What is your story and how did it lead to the things you're doing now? And why you get up and do the things you do now?
I think that ultimately the Steve Jobs quote of you can't connect the dots looking forward, but you can looking back, seems to be that I do find, oh, right, that's why I did that, and that's why I did that, and that's why I went through this, and it's all equipped me to be and do what I'm trying to do today. But it's an interesting one because I think obviously the biggest sort of tear in my life's origins or beginnings was my parents' divorce and the pain that brought, and having to become the man of the house quite quickly and look after my brother in a way where I probably shouldn't have, just because of the nature of the pressure surrounding two parents that are navigating pain and anger and frustration, two step parents that join and navigate jealousy, pain, anger, frustration, and you've got a 6 and a 4-year-old, me being the 6-year-old, that are just like, what's going on? And inevitably you start to then allow a voice to develop. Like, is it my fault my dad's not here? What did I do wrong? So navigating all of that and the childhood wounds that come from that, I think made me a lot more understanding of pain, seeing pain in others. I felt one of the positives to come from all of that is my empathy. I can just feel and absorb, like, oof, I'm drawn to where others are in pain, to see if I, not necessarily to fix it, but just hold space for it. So that definitely was a big part of my wanting to do something good, to have an impact. I think I knew I wanted to travel early, like to see the world. I was always, my parents say to me that, from 9 years old, used to tell us after watching animated cartoons of Willy Fogg, 80 Days Around the World, like, I want to see the world, I want to see the world. And as soon as I got the chance at 23, I did. I quit my job, and I'm jumping the timeline, but I quit a job that inevitably I thought I wanted because I went to university and did business. I left university and got a job in a bank. I was a foreign FX, trader, sort of confirming the trades in the back office. And it was status, right? I worked for Bank of America and I had this and this. But I quickly realised that I didn't like the job at all. The one thing I liked about the job was the people I spoke to around the world, doing this very dull, this is the account number, can you confirm it? But just chatting to them a little bit, having your superiors frown over like you're spending too long on the phone, but it was relationships. I enjoyed relationships. And just as I was at the crescendo moment, potentially, of navigating the next steps of that as a career, like, you could go to the middle office and start to learn how to trade, or potentially go to the trading floor, I quit the job. I was like, I don't want that level of responsibility, because what it comes with is a level of money that will trap me, because I will buy a flat and buy a car, and then I'll have to keep earning to service those things. So it was a moment, it was like, I need to travel. So I quit and traveled the world, backpack, shoestring. My best friend came with me. But that was where I went out and saw things from my own perspectives. Like, wow, there's so much similarity in this experience and this culture. And, they call God this and they do it this way, or whatever it may be. Watching our families exist together, just really seeing the world through the eyes of just the beaten track. And I think that was a big moment of like, wow, I was a lot more aware of what was happening. I was a lot more curious than I was, this is how we do it here, so that's it, because I grew up in southeast London, where we wore Nike and we wore Ralph Lauren and we listened to Garage and we went to these places, and if anything was outside of that, then it wasn't for us. So suddenly going out and appreciating difference, like, oof, love it, so different. I loved experiences. And inevitably, I guess I met someone who spoke about teaching in a way where it was like attractive to me. It was like, I love teaching. It's leading people, these 30 little minds, just watching them grow and build and being part of that journey. So when I got back from traveling, I was like, right, I'm going to get into teaching. So I got into teaching, and I got a first gig in a pupil referral unit in Peckham, where these kids have been excluded from state school, punished for their behaviour. And I could quickly see that their behaviour wasn't the issue. It was the education system. They didn't learn in that way. So they become disruptive. And rather than trying to create a space where you could cater to that way of learning, you punish them. And inevitably that took me to another school, and that's where Bite the Ballot was founded. And I guess then I jumped on the opportunity, having realised that I wasn't interested in politics. I could look back on the reasons why I was working in a school where there was approximately 200 sixth formers that could vote, and there was no appetite to do so. So this lunchtime club, made up of other staff and students, that tried to say, how do we get more people engaged in politics, and use play and creativity and games as a way of getting you to recognise power and respond to a call to action. That became something I jumped on. and inevitably I quit my job and I grew this social enterprise, even though it was a charity. But still, I guess that was part of I found a sense of purpose in tackling issues that were far bigger than me, finding strategies about how you can reach people, make impact. And I guess this took me to where I am today with Play Verto. But ultimately, it's just to try and reach people with lived experience and amplify their voices and bring their realities to places where they're often unheard, but they're a crucial part of the solution.
This whole thing of like, be like us, or we're gonna punish you, right? That's what I think so many of us experience in a system was not created for us, right? And you're able to bring data points and gamified experiences, which we know do convert much better, to prove why we need to overcome that challenge and rebuild those systems from the ground up, probably.
But the resistance I'm getting to that,
That's what I was going to ask, is like,
unbelievable.
you can give anyone as much data as you want. If I don't care.
Well, not even that, right? Not even caring about the data, but just like the way something's been done, like academic research has been done a set way. The survey tools they use are set tools, and you come in and be disruptive and go, look, I can do that playfully. I can 3x your completion rate. I get a deeper data. I get a more quality data. I can see from the dwell time how much people are thinking about this, rather than a very linear click, 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 give me an Amazon voucher. But the amount of resistance I get to that, you can't do this using Play. Why the hell not? So I think that's one of the difficult things about entrepreneurship more broadly, and where we probably started this conversation in terms of the climates where it's encouraged and the climates where it's difficult, is that when you're innovating or being pioneering, the biggest challenge is to convince people that resist.
You know what? I do think that there is something to be said, though, from working ground up, so bottom up instead of top down. Like, I probably registered to vote because of By the Ballot, realistically, although I don't think about it because it was ages ago, and you don't make these connections. But like you said, looking back, I go, the first time I probably heard that I had to register to vote was probably because of By the Ballot. And now, whenever a new voting cycle comes up, people on social media will be like, make sure you're registered to vote. And organizations will do it, and people will do it for each other. So it's, your own social networks, you as the leader of your own little world. With my 500 followers on Instagram, I'm going to put that on my Instagram story. Make sure you register to vote. Oh, I just registered to vote, and you take a little picture. And that, you probably had a lot of unspoken impact that you don't realize, because you can't possibly track the indirect impact that you've had. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's that there's power in that too. That is probably, for the average person and for our listeners and for us in our individual lives, that's probably the more powerful thing that we can do. It's like, we can complain that the government doesn't care as much as they should, or isn't looking at it as much as they should, or is resisting too much. We can say the same thing of companies. At the end of the day, we can complain all we like. If we physically can't change them, or we have to wait for them to slowly come on board, the most we can do is whatever we can do, which means in our own lives.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. And instantly I look at that and it's like, it's taken me a lot of work internally to appreciate the effects, the ripple effects. And I think that also helped me develop a way of being, which is, it's about the outcome, not necessarily the attribution. Does it matter if my name's not attached to it, really, if it happened? Because it took me a long time. I used to get really frustrated with the copycats that came in and tried to do things and do them, or the people that have been given the MBEs for youth engagement in politics. And it's like, I started that. You talk about MVRD and you do all these national voter registration drives. It didn't even exist until I created it. So again, and then that little battle with the ego is like, it's okay. I can celebrate their success, and I can sit back and go, I was part of that, even if it wasn't recognized, because I did things for a decade that just weren't happening here. Some of it was happening in the US. So it's an interesting thing to sort of consider those ripple effects and feel content. But in a society where these symbols of what we wear, what we have, what we own are equally as prominent in your LinkedIn bio. MBE, got this award, got this accolade. So that we've even created it like, well, if it didn't get recognized, you didn't do it.
Yeah.
You know, and this
pictures where it didn't happen.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. So this is this really difficult polarization of like feeling content in myself of like, I did some pretty cool things which have actually shaped the system, but I might not have got recognized for them. And that's okay. I think that little clip I sent you of the Obama shout out, they're all of those views are me, probably, because it was like, it was just that little bit of like, from time to time when it was all feeling like getting on top, I'd watch that and just sit back and think about the enormity of that moment. You know, the leader of the free world at that time, one of the most recognized and charismatic presidents ever.
Yeah. Wow.
Called me a change agent and quoted me. Pinchable. And it's funny because people I grew up with in sort of council estate, they love it. They love it, you know. So just, it's funny. I feel like just these symbols that we talk about in terms of consumerism, they equally exist in terms of status that we put on ourselves. It's a pressure, but we exist in each other's stories in many ways. And these ripples, like, you know, some of my biggest learnings have come from failure, ultimately, or pain.
Yeah.
There's so much wisdom in pain if we create the space to just see it. And sometimes we don't. And what we inevitably do is attract the same lesson to us again and again and again and wonder why it keeps coming.
Yeah, the way I like to describe it is, if the world is really trying to send you a signal, it will get louder and louder until it backhands you so hard you can't ignore it anymore.
For sure.
And that's the failure of, you know, the thing, the career, the business, the relationship. It will just get worse and louder until you acknowledge it. I know you care a lot about, we've talked about already, what you're essentially alluding to here is this inner work, right? Is working on ourselves internally to affect the external work, the outer world that we can work on, right? Yeah. We all have an inner world, and the Hermetic principle is as within, so without.
Yeah.
And like you were talking about mirrors as well. So this inner world, or outer world, mirrors this inner world. So we need to do this internal work first. What do you think is the most important internal work that we do? And how do we get started doing it? What's the simplest thing I can do to start working on it?
Accept that you have to do it. I think the biggest...
Step two. No, I'm kidding.
It's like, once we accept that the thing within our control is ourselves.
Yes.
And the changes we make, when you start to see the changes you make in yourself and how that affects the room or other people. I had I'll go back to that sort of difficult moment of a difficult divorce, because what it then meant was having parents that had fallen out to the point where they'd divorce, and then step parents that would quickly sort of reaffirm why that one's wrong and why that one's wrong and what we got to do, you know. Inevitably, because it was the right thing to do, they would all come together around a birthday or a Christmas. And I hated it. I just felt so aware of the anxiety and the frustration. And one of the things I learned in therapy was, well, what if I turn up with a different energy? What if I turn up in the sense of that's not going to affect me, and I'll turn up just appreciating everyone for who they are and what they bring. And you start to see your own energy affects the room, right? If you turn up fearful and anxious, you start to see how that makes other people fearful and anxious. It's not an exact science every time, but I started to appreciate the power of how I feel within and the effect that can have on other people. So for me, that inner work is the acceptance that it has to be done. You say step 2. For me, step 2 is the commitment of peeling back the layers, because, I addressed that issue, it's done. No. You addressed it to the level you was meant to today, but maybe that lesson's going to come back to you in a different way.
Okay.
So I feel like finding a tribe to do that with, building tools and experiences that work for you. They might not necessarily work for everyone, but mine are journaling and meditation, if I stick to it. Don't tell myself I'm too busy. And community. I've been part of a coaching circle of sorts with 6 social entrepreneur leaders for the past 6 years. And we've had a relationship where we've grown over time. But we would present to each other issues in our businesses, issues in our families, issues in our personal lives. And because of the length of that relationship together, we are mirrors and reminders. Hold on, you've been through this before. You know you've got the tools to get through that. So I think community and a tribe to practice this with and be vulnerable with is essential. But ultimately, it's that notion of acceptance that a lot of what I'm angry about, as you've alluded to earlier, will often be elements that I still need to address within myself. But I'll project it on someone else. And that I think that would see a monumental shift if we were able to catch that, right? We judge continuously. Is it safe to cross the road? Can I really eat that? What happens if I go there? But there's a difference between judging and being judgmental. And for me, it's that little... I've tried to develop a buffer between how something happens. Do I react, or can I just hold space for it quickly to just accept it? A parenting teaches you that. What? Woof, you've escalated because you've jumped on it. Whereas something happens, can I just hold space quickly? Right, and then just in the milliseconds, just consider the way I react will change the trajectory of this. And we can do that with each other. Straight. How many people just look at the politics? Like you mentioned, if we look at the US, gosh, man, that was so... You can't like anything that would associate you with this party or this party. We can't exist together, right? We can't be purple. We can't... Blue and red can't exist at the same time. It's amazing to just feel like how that ripples down in our everyday lives. So a good friend of mine once said that he looks at other people with this notion of the pain in me salutes the pain in you, and the love in me salutes the love in you. And I always find that quite a powerful thing, because,
it's very namaste.
Right?
The divine in me bows to the divine in you.
Yeah.
That's
because
what namaste means.
they exist.
Yeah. This, the reason I kind of laughed at myself when I said step 2 is because I think a lot of times the answer is you must start with awareness. And I think we hear it so much that people kind of switch off sometimes when they hear that.
Yeah.
But all directionality requires intentionality. And you must have an awareness that you need to set an intention in the first place. So I think you're so right. This added element of like commit to that and use other people. So build up your environment to reinforce the commitment, the accountability, the whole thing of those 5 closest people to you make up you or whatever.
Yeah.
This is the practical context that makes the awareness powerful and makes it meaningful and practical, which is really, really potent.
One to think about a lot.
What we're describing here is you must do the internal work ideally first, because your external world, your outer world, will reflect the internal. What would you say to the anecdotal evidence that plenty of people create lots of at least material success without ever working on themselves? Some of the richest people in the world are the people with the most significant child wounds, the people who are least happy, the people who always need more and have so much lack or experience so much lack.
Because they took that pain as the driver, right? and they felt that the route to address that pain will be the status, the money, whatever it is. But I'm pretty certain that in all of those people, that pain still exists. It's probably pushed down to the depths of, won't admit it, but it will come out. It will allow itself to spill over from time to time. And that is a myth, by the way, that we see that the richest people are not the happiest. I think the happiest people tend to be the people that feel a sense of fulfillment. And if that fulfillment comes only through money, I think there's only a certain level you'll experience to that fulfillment. And that's why you chase it again. You want 3 times more, as you've alluded to. You need the next car. They've released that. I need it. You're chasing something that doesn't really bring fulfillment because you haven't stopped to really consider what fulfillment is. Or, ultimately, the more this notion of sort of self-actualization, working to really understand oneself and how I show up and how I can react and the effect that has on other people. That's so powerful, man. And if we all were able to do that, I think we could live a little bit more harmoniously and less judgmental. The way we can treat each other is unbelievable. But yeah, I feel there's nothing wrong with these levels of status. I live in a life where I want things, but my real purpose is around impact. It drives me. It's given me an ability to endure far more than I think I could have without it. It's given me a resilience and a dedication, and probably for reasons that are preventing me to be more successful than what I am today, it's given me a sense of integrity that I won't sell out. I think I'm doing some work at the moment with Harvard around human flourishing, and they're going to gamify the human flourishing metrics and indicators and put them on the Verto platform. Super cool, super exciting. But when I started to look into how they measure flourishing, traditional things like mental health and physical health and social connection, but purpose is such a big thing. And I think from what I've experienced and what I've seen, those in my life that have the most purpose are doing something to benefit others or the planet or communities, not just to benefit themselves. And the true one benefit we can do to ourselves is the inner work and the consciousness and that dedication to grow and feel like I'm tired of that constant trigger. I don't want to get to the space where life gives me that backhander because I've ignored. Like, what does it look like if I open up Pandora's box and step into that wound again? As painful as it is, to take a walk with my inner child and just let him know that it's okay.
And do you do that physically? Like you go for a walk, like a walking meditation of sorts?
I have done. I mean, obviously, I feel like I'm a classic. If I'm at retreats and things like that, I'm the best participant. I'm like, woof, I'll eat it all up. And then the key is, how do I bring that into my everyday life?
Yes. How do you do that?
I think things that I've alluded to, like I will journal. I'll create a sanctuary to just have these conversations with myself. This is definitely a tool for me, just to clear my head.
There is also a sense of curiosity and play and lightheartedness, which you've alluded to a lot. And I'm wondering, like, the practical how, right? Like, it sounds like you cultivated that in your life, and that's what Verto seems to stand for a lot as well as an organization, which is beautiful. I think the question is always going to be, I'm super busy. How? How do I do this for myself?
Yeah. That is probably the biggest one battle most people will have to take on, to consider addressing time. This is, for me, is the biggest currency that exists: time. Like what it means to have it. I experienced that. I think that's why it was a fundamental piece where I referenced traveling. I experienced time. I experienced the need to not have an alarm for anything other than, oh, we're leaving here in 2 weeks because we've got that flight to go to the next place, or we're getting on that bus, to just be. We've lost that a lot in the way we've created our lives. You know, like if your calendar's not full, if you've not got something planned, it's a waste. So I think time management and these things of just thinking that you can curate this balance. I don't, I know I can say this stuff. I've touched it, so I know the power of it, but does it exist in me daily? This is the ongoing piece, right? But I'm reminded by the tribe, of the community I'm part of, or the fact that I've created relationships with other men where we can be vulnerable and talk in a way that we probably wouldn't have unless we were drunk or whatever. So it's like some of these pieces is also looking back and going, gosh, I've come so far. It's like classic, like if you're only looking up the mountain, how much more you've got to go, you never really stop to look back on how far you've come. And just those moments of reflection on how far I've come can give me that next boost of courage, that bit of appreciation for, do I remember when that was the biggest fundamental issue that I never thought I'd overcome? Look where I am now.
What a powerful question.
Yeah. So it's everyone's going to have their own journey, and I trust in that. But who knows? Maybe that I can certainly see in others that are doing this stuff an element of, oh, I'll try that, or I've got an appreciation for their way of being, without the pressure of thinking that has to be all the time. I've never experienced a constant level of inner peace. But then I'm not a Buddhist monk, I've chosen a certain path, but I certainly appreciate this notion of Zen and where I get it from. I certainly don't get it from material things, but I can enjoy them.
Yes, enjoyment without attachment.
Yeah.
This has been really powerful, man. As we bring this one to a close, I've got a final question I ask everyone who comes on the show. Everyone gets the exact same question. And it doesn't have to be about anything we've talked about so far, although yours might be very linked. Mike, I'd love to know, what is the biggest question in your life that you are still searching for an answer to?
Oof. That's a good one. Funny enough, I had therapy this morning, and I feel like when I bring things to therapy, there seems to be a repeated pattern, which on the one hand is beautiful because the repeated pattern points back to me. And when it points back to me, therefore it's in my control. But the biggest question I seem to grapple with is feeling worthy. And I feel like for whatever reason, as humans, we have these moments in our lives, parents' divorce or this accident or this piece of trauma, that make us feel less worthy. And then as a result, that plays out in other areas of my life. Can I go get that deal? Do I feel worthy for it? Can we take that contract? Can we actually go out and do this? So I think the biggest question I grapple with is like, I am worthy, like how to really feel that sense of worthiness. Let these things come in a way, that sort of sense of abundance.
Yes. What's been working so far?
Gratitude, for sure. Like gratitude on the qualities that I can look back on and say, right, yeah, I'm honourable, I'm noble, I've got values. These things are powerful. But then there are repeated patterns. The way I grew up, that sort of poverty mindset, that scarcity mindset, and they play out in my life. And it all comes back to this notion of, how do I feel worthy? And I wonder what that means for society. Like if we all felt worthy enough to be here, to address these issues, to look after each other. Most of it is an issue with ourselves that we play out with other people, as we've alluded to in our conversation today. But creating the space for it to exist, accepting, and then just maybe taking that next step in the exploration. Loving oneself equips us to love others, right? I don't think I grew up really loving myself to the extent where I could feel worthy.
I resonate a lot with that because I think I was in / am in the same boat. You know, life tells you you're not, or at least that's how you interpret it, especially when you're younger. And yeah, it's on us as adults to go through that. But as you alluded to, there isn't one answer, boom, done, achieved, and it's perfect forever, right? For the rest of our lives. It's an evolving journey, and it will continue to be one. You're on a really powerful one. So,
and that's the key, I think, is the acceptance that sometimes that journey is solo and sometimes it's together, but an appreciation that everyone's on that journey.
Yes. Well, I want to congratulate you for going on yours, because it's a tough one to be open and vulnerable and admit that you're going on and going through, right? So, you know, to folks like us, great work, man. And I'm excited for you and for where it takes you. And thank you for coming on the show and for all the work you do to try to bring people together and open their minds up to what we should be doing differently. I think the world's going through a tough time right now, and we need people doing more of that and being part of that consciousness conversation, as I described it, I guess. So thank you so much, man. I appreciate you.
Thanks, brother. It's been a pleasure.
Alrighty, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I hope you found it valuable. We've reached a number of really important milestones on this show already. It's only been a couple of months, but I'm so grateful to those of you who not only subscribe, but also who listen this far along, who leave the comments on posts, or who give me really powerful, beautiful messages in response. It's been a humbling journey, and there is so much more to come. If there's something about this episode and the question that we answered, or any of the learnings that you took away that you want to make sure someone else you know understands themselves, then please do share this episode with them, along with your reflections, teaching other people something that you learned, passing the information on, or even just writing it down for yourself. All help you retain the answers to this, and any inspiration it gave you even more. That's the purpose of all this, is to give you as much positive, powerful, impactful results as possible on your journey to developing your own inner leader from so many different dimensions, not just the one we've talked about today. So thank you so much for being here, sending lots of love, and here's to your success.